My name is Harper Wilson. I'm 32 years old, and my own sister took my identity for a $100,000 business loan, and now she wants me to help her keep it quiet. You heard that right. The person I trusted most in this world, the one I shared childhood secrets with, the one who knew my social security number by heart because we used to help each other with paperwork. She used everything she knew about me to commit fraud. And the worst part? She didn't even think twice about it. She looked me straight in the eyes after I found out and said, "Harper, you work with financial crimes every day. You know how to fix this. You owe me this." Can you imagine hearing those words from your own flesh and blood? Have you ever trusted someone so completely that the thought of them betraying you never even crossed your mind? If you've ever felt that gut-wrenching moment when trust shatters into a million pieces, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because what I'm about to share with you goes deeper than just family drama. This is about identity, loyalty, and the moment you realize that the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones who hurt you the most. Have you ever had someone you love turn your life upside down? Let me paint you a picture of who I am, because it matters for what comes next. I'm what my family always called the boring one. While my sister Madison was the golden child, the entrepreneur, the risk taker, the one everyone admired at family gatherings, I was the one with the government job. That's how they described it. They'd roll their eyes when I'd talk about my work at the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. "Oh, Harper's doing her bureaucrat thing again," my mom would say with a dismissive wave. Little did they know that my boring job meant I investigated cases of identity theft, money laundering, and fraud every single day. I knew every loophole, every red flag, every single way people tried to game the system. I was good at what I did, really good. But to them, I was just pushing papers. Madison was different. She was electric. She could walk into a room and everyone would gravitate toward her like moths to a flame. She started 3 businesses before she turned 30. Sure, 2 of them failed, but nobody talked about that. They talked about her entrepreneurial spirit and her fearless attitude. Our parents poured money into her ventures without question. When she needed $20,000 to start her boutique clothing line, they gave it to her. When that failed and she wanted to open a wellness center, they refinanced their house to help her. I never asked them for a dime. I put myself through college, worked 2 jobs to pay off my student loans, and built my career from the ground up. But somehow, I was still the disappointment because I chose safety over passion. That's the family dynamic you need to understand before we get to the part where everything exploded. The thing about being underestimated your whole life is that you start to believe it yourself. I started to think maybe I was too cautious, too rigid, too afraid to take risks like Madison. Maybe that's why I always said yes when she needed something. When she called me crying about her credit score being too low for a business loan, I spent hours coaching her on how to improve it. When she needed references for her LLC formation, I vouched for her. When she asked to use my address for her business registration because she was between apartments, I didn't hesitate. I wanted to be the supportive sister. I wanted to prove that even though I was boring, I was still there for her. I wanted her to see me as more than just the backup plan. But here's what I didn't see coming, and this is where everything changes. One random Tuesday morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls from my bank. 17. My hands were shaking as I called them back, thinking maybe there was a security breach or my card got stolen. The representative's voice was cold and professional when she said, "Ms. Wilson, we need to discuss the $100,000 business loan that's now 60 days past due." My blood ran cold. I told her there must be some mistake. I never took out a business loan. I never even applied for one. That's when she read back my social security number, my date of birth, my mother's maiden name, everything. All correct. All mine. But the signature? I'd never seen that application in my life. And then she said something that made my stomach drop. The loan was approved based on employment verification from Wilson Consulting Group, and the business address matches your sister's LLC registration. You won't believe what happened next when I confronted Madison about this. I drove to Madison's apartment like a woman possessed, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Every red light felt like an eternity. My mind was racing through every possible explanation. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe someone stole both of our identities. Maybe there was a clerical error at the bank. But deep down, In that gut-level place where you know the truth before your brain catches up, I knew. I knew it was her. The pieces fit too perfectly. The business address. The timing right after our conversation about her credit. The fact that she knew every single answer to my security questions, because we grew up in the same house, with the same memories. When I finally got to her door and knocked, she opened it with this bright smile like nothing was wrong, like she was genuinely happy to see me. "Harper, what a surprise. Come in. I just made coffee." That smile haunts me still, because this is about more than just the money. If you've ever had someone betray you and then act like everything's normal, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Make sure you're subscribed because the conversation that happened next will show you exactly how manipulation works in families. Have you ever confronted someone you love about something terrible they did? Drop a comment below. I didn't sit down. I didn't accept the coffee. I just stood there in her doorway and asked her point blank, "Madison, did you take out a $100,000 loan in my name?" The silence that followed felt like it lasted for hours. I watched her face go through this incredible transformation. First confusion, then recognition, then this flash of panic before she settled on defensiveness. "Harper, I can explain," she started. And those 4 words confirmed everything. She didn't deny it. She didn't look shocked. She immediately went to justification mode. She started talking fast, the way she always did when she was backed into a corner. She told me about this amazing business opportunity that couldn't wait. She said her credit was temporarily compromised from the failed wellness center. She said she tried to get the loan herself but kept getting rejected. Then came the part that really broke me. She said she knew I'd never agree to co-sign for her, so she had to be creative. Creative. That's the word she used. Like committing identity theft and fraud was some kind of clever problem-solving instead of a federal crime. She explained it all so casually, like she was telling me about a grocery run. She'd used my information to create false employment records showing I worked at her consulting company, making twice my actual salary. She'd forged my signature on the loan documents. She'd set up an email account in my name to correspond with the bank. She'd even made a fake ID with her picture and my information to meet with the loan officer in person. The level of premeditation was stunning. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment mistake. This was calculated, planned, and executed over weeks. I felt like the floor was disappearing beneath my feet. My sister, my own sister, had stolen my identity. She'd risked my career, my financial future, my freedom. Did she not understand that I worked in financial crimes? That if this came out, I wouldn't just lose my job, I could lose my security clearance, I could be investigated myself, I could face charges if anyone thought I was complicit? My voice was shaking when I asked her, "Madison, do you have any idea what you've done? Do you understand this is a felony?" And that's when she said something that made my blood run cold. She reached out and grabbed my hands, her eyes filling with tears, and whispered, "Harper, you're the only one who can fix this. You know how these systems work. Please, I'm begging you. If you turn me in, I'll go to prison. Is that what you want? To destroy your own sister?" The manipulation was masterful, and I hate myself for admitting that in that moment, I wavered. She'd turned the tables completely. Suddenly, I wasn't the victim. I was the one with the power to either save her or destroy her. She painted this picture of our parents finding out, of holiday dinners ruined forever, of her spending years in a federal prison. She cried real tears. She told me she'd pay back every penny, that the business was actually going well, and she just needed time. She promised this would never happen again. She made me feel like the bad guy for even considering reporting her. And then she said the words that still echo in my head. "We're family, Harper. Family protects each other. After everything Mom and Dad did for us, after everything I've been through, you're really going to choose some bank over your own sister?" But what she didn't know was that I'd spent years studying exactly how fraudsters justify their crimes, and I recognized every single manipulation tactic she was using. The question was, would I have the strength to do what I knew was right, even if it meant losing her forever? That's when things got even more complicated. I left Madison's apartment that day without giving her an answer, and that's when the real pressure campaign began. She didn't just ask once and wait for my response. No. She launched a full-scale operation to make sure I stayed quiet. The next morning, I woke up to a text from my mom. "Madison told me you two had a little disagreement." She's going through such a hard time right now, Harper. I hope you can find it in your heart to support her like family should. My mom didn't even know what the disagreement was about, but she'd already taken sides. That's how it always worked in our family. Madison was struggling, so everyone rallied around her. It didn't matter what she'd done. Within 48 hours, I'd received calls from my dad, my aunt, even my grandmother asking me to be understanding and not make things harder for Madison. She'd spun some story about a business dispute between us, painting herself as the victim and me as the difficult sister who wouldn't help. If you've ever been gaslit by your own family, where suddenly you're the villain for standing up for yourself, smash that like button and subscribe, because what I'm about to tell you about family manipulation will make your jaw drop. Have you ever been pressured to protect someone who hurt you just because they're family? Let me know in the comments. But Madison's pressure tactics went way beyond just getting our family involved. She started showing up at my apartment unannounced, sometimes late at night, crying on my doorstep. She'd bring me my favorite coffee from that expensive place downtown, the one I only treated myself to on special occasions. She'd send me old photos of us as kids with captions like, "Remember when we promised to always have each other's backs?" and "Sisters forever, no matter what." She knew exactly which emotional buttons to push. One night, she showed up with a shoebox full of memories, birthday cards I'd given her, friendship bracelets we'd made together, a photo of us at my college graduation where she was the only family member who showed up because everyone else had to work. She spread them all out on my coffee table like evidence in a trial, trying to prove that our bond meant more than some stupid loan. The guilt was suffocating. Every time I tried to think clearly about what I needed to do, Madison's voice would creep into my head. "You're going to send your own sister to prison?" She'd say it with this look of betrayal, like I was the one who'd committed the crime. She started making promises that got more elaborate with each conversation. She'd pay me back in 6 months. No, 3 months. Actually, she'd already gotten 2 major clients and the money would start flowing in next week. She showed me fabricated contracts, made-up revenue projections, even fake testimonials from clients I'm pretty sure didn't exist. She was doubling down on the lies, building a house of cards on top of the original fraud. And the scariest part? I could see she actually believed her own stories. She'd convinced herself this was all going to work out, that her business was about to explode, that she'd be able to fix everything before anyone got hurt. Then came the threats, subtle at first, then increasingly direct. Madison started reminding me about things I'd rather forget, like the time in high school when I'd borrowed Dad's car without permission and she'd covered for me, or when I'd failed a college exam and she'd helped me convince our parents I was sick instead of admitting I hadn't studied. "I've always protected you, Harper," she'd say, her voice dripping with implication. "I've kept your secrets. I've had your back. And now, when I need you just this once, you're going to throw me under the bus?" She made it sound like keeping her fraud hidden was just returning a favor, like we were even. She started hinting that if I reported her, she'd make sure everyone knew I was complicit. She'd tell the authorities I knew about the loan all along, that we were partners in the business, that I'd helped her set it up. It was a bluff. I knew it was a bluff, but it still terrified me. The pressure built to this crushing weight that I carried every single day. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus at work. I'd sit at my desk analyzing other people's financial crimes while my own sister's fraud file was probably sitting somewhere in the system, waiting to be flagged. Every time my phone rang, my heart would race. Every time I saw an email from the bank, I'd panic. Madison had created this ticking time bomb, and she'd handed me the timer, telling me I was the only one who could defuse it. She started showing up at my office building, waiting in the lobby to accidentally run into me during lunch. She'd walk with me, talking nonstop about her business plans, her dreams, her fears of losing everything. She'd cry in public, making scenes that drew attention, forcing me into the role of the comforting sister while strangers watched. And through it all, she kept asking the same question in different ways. "You're not going to report me, right, Harper? We're going to fix this together, right? Because that's what family does." But what Madison didn't understand was that every single pressure tactic she used, every manipulation, every threat, was actually making my decision clearer. Because I was starting to see that this wasn't about one loan or one mistake. This was about who my sister really was, and whether I could live with myself if I helped her get away with it. And that realization led me to the most painful question I'd ever had to answer. The moral dilemma I faced wasn't just about right versus wrong. It was about family loyalty versus personal integrity, and those two things had been tangled up in my head my entire life. I grew up believing that family came first, always, no exceptions. Our parents drilled that into us from the time we were kids. Blood is thicker than water, my dad would say whenever my sister and I fought. You two only have each other in this world. My mom would tell stories about her own sister, how they'd stuck together through their parents' divorce, through financial hardships, through everything. The message was clear. You protect family no matter what they do, because at the end of the day, they're all you've got. But sitting in my apartment at 2 a.m., staring at the bank statements showing that $100,000 loan in my name, I started to wonder if that philosophy had limits. Did family loyalty mean enabling crimes? Did it mean sacrificing my own future to protect someone who'd hurt me without hesitation? I made lists. Actual lists on paper, like some kind of moral inventory. On one side, reasons to report Madison. On the other, reasons to stay quiet. The report side filled up fast. It was fraud, it was illegal, it was destroying my credit, it could cost me my career, it was fundamentally wrong. She showed no real remorse, she'd do it again. The stay quiet side had only a few items, but they weighed 1,000 pounds. She's my sister, it would destroy our family. Mom and Dad would never forgive me. She might actually go to prison. I'd be alone. I stared at those lists for hours, trying to find clarity, but all I found was more confusion. Because here's what nobody tells you about moral dilemmas. Knowing what's right doesn't make it easier to do, especially when doing the right thing means losing people you love. I started having conversations with myself that would have sounded crazy to anyone listening. I'd play out both scenarios in my head like alternate timelines. Timeline A, I report Madison. She gets arrested, prosecuted, possibly convicted. Our parents are devastated. Family gatherings become impossible. I'm branded as the sister who sent her own sibling to prison over money. I'm isolated, but my integrity is intact. My career is safe. The fraud gets corrected, but I'm alone. Timeline B, I help Madison cover it up. I use my knowledge of financial systems to hide the fraud. Maybe I even help her make the payments to avoid detection. We stay close. Our family stays together. But I become a criminal myself. I violate everything I believe in. I risk my career, my freedom, my self-respect. And worst of all, I enable Madison to keep hurting people. Because if she got away with this, what would stop her from doing it again? Both timelines ended in loss. Just different kinds of loss. My work became unbearable because I was surrounded by constant reminders of exactly what I was dealing with. I'd sit in meetings where we'd discuss identity theft cases, and I'd feel like a hypocrite. One case I reviewed was eerily similar. A woman whose sister had used her credit to finance a business. The victim had reported it immediately, and the sister was prosecuted. I read through the victim's statement where she talked about the emotional devastation, the betrayal, the years of therapy needed to process it. But she also talked about feeling free, about reclaiming her identity, about not being controlled by guilt anymore. I wondered if she ever regretted it. I wondered if she still had nightmares about sending her sister to prison. My colleagues would make offhand comments like, "Can you imagine doing this to family?" Or, "What kind of person steals from their own sister?" And I'd sit there silent, feeling like they were talking about me even though I was the victim. The worst part of this whole moral crisis was realizing that there was no clean answer, no solution that didn't involve pain. I kept waiting for some moment of clarity, some sign that would tell me definitively what to do. I even found myself doing things I'd never done before, like researching prison sentences for identity theft, reading stories from families torn apart by similar situations, joining anonymous online forums where people discussed similar dilemmas. One post stuck with me. Someone wrote, "Protecting someone from the consequences of their actions isn't love, it's enabling. Real love sometimes means letting people face what they've created, even when it breaks your heart." That hit me hard, because I realized that's what I'd been doing my whole life with Madison, Every time she failed, every time she made a mistake, someone swooped in to fix it. Our parents bailed her out financially. I bailed her out emotionally and practically. She'd never actually faced real consequences for anything. And now she'd escalated to federal crimes because she'd learned that someone would always catch her before she fell. Was I really protecting her by staying quiet? Or was I just teaching her that she could do anything without repercussions? And if I reported her, was that revenge or justice? Was I punishing her? Or was I finally setting a boundary? These questions tortured me day and night, but an unexpected conversation was about to force me to confront the truth I'd been avoiding. Sitting alone in my apartment one night, staring at old family photos, I realized this pattern with Madison didn't start with a $100,000 loan. It started decades ago, in a childhood where I learned my role was to make things easier for everyone else. I was 7 years old the first time I remember consciously putting Madison first. She'd broken Mom's favorite vase while playing inside, something we weren't supposed to do. And when Mom came home furious, Madison looked at me with these huge, terrified eyes. Before I could think, I said I did it. I took the punishment. I got grounded for 2 weeks while Madison got to go to Sarah Mitchell's birthday party that weekend. Mom never questioned it because I was the responsible one, and Madison was just spirited. That became our dynamic. Madison acted, I absorbed the consequences. She was the comet, bright and unpredictable, and I was the background she blazed across. If this story is hitting close to home, if you've ever been the one who sacrifices yourself to keep the peace in your family, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like because you need to hear how this story ends. Have you ever realized you've been playing a role your whole life that someone else wrote for you? Drop your story in the comments. In high school, Madison dated this guy named Jake Turner, who was bad news from day one. Everyone could see it except her. He was controlling, possessive, and had a reputation for getting into fights. When he started pressuring her to skip school and lie to our parents, I became her cover story. Harper and I are studying at the library, she'd tell Mom while she was actually at some party 3 towns over. I'd sit in the actual library for hours, making sure I could describe what we supposedly studied, carrying the weight of her lies so she could be free. When Jake eventually cheated on her and broke her heart, I was the one who held her while she cried for weeks. Our parents praised me for being such a supportive sister, never knowing I'd enabled the whole disaster. Madison learned she could take risks because I'd always be there to catch her when she fell. College was supposed to be my fresh start, my chance to figure out who I was without being defined as Madison's sister. I chose a school 8 hours away, got a scholarship, worked 2 campus jobs to avoid asking our parents for money. But even there, Madison found ways to make me her safety net. She'd call crying at 2 a.m. about whatever crisis she was facing, and I'd stay up counseling her instead of studying for my exams. When she dropped out of community college after 1 semester because she wasn't feeling inspired, I helped her hide it from our parents for 3 months by forwarding her their emails and making excuses for why she couldn't come home for visits. When she maxed out the credit card Dad had given her for emergencies, I lent her my savings to pay it off before the bill came. I was building my own life, but she was still pulling me back into the role of her protector, her fixer, her safety net. The pattern continued into adulthood in increasingly expensive ways. When Madison's first business failed, I spent my vacation time helping her sort through the legal mess instead of taking the trip to Seattle I'd been planning for years. When her second business collapsed, I connected her with contacts in my professional network, putting my own reputation on the line to help her get meetings she wouldn't have gotten otherwise. When she needed someone to practice her investor pitches with, I'd spend hours giving feedback, helping her refine her presentations, essentially doing unpaid consulting work because that's what sisters do. Our parents saw all of this and praised me for being supportive, but they never once asked if I needed support. They never noticed that I'd stopped talking about my own life, because all our family conversations revolved around Madison's latest venture, Madison's latest crisis, Madison's latest dream. Looking back at all those moments, I realized something that made me feel sick. I'd been training Madison to use me my entire life. I'd taught her that her needs mattered more than mine. I'd shown her that she could take from me without asking, and I'd absorb it without complaining. I'd modeled that her dreams justified any sacrifice I had to make. And now she'd taken that lesson to its logical conclusion. My identity, my credit, my financial future were all just resources she could tap into to fuel her ambitions. Though a $100,000 loan wasn't an aberration, it was the inevitable result of a lifetime of boundary violations that I'd allowed, enabled, and normalized. I'd been so desperate to be seen as the good sister, the supportive one, the reliable one, that I'd erased myself in the process. And the most painful realization was that if I stayed quiet about this fraud, I'd be continuing that pattern for the rest of my life. But something was about to happen that would make staying quiet impossible. The weight of this decision started affecting every single aspect of my life in ways I couldn't hide anymore. I lost 12 pounds in 3 weeks because I couldn't eat without feeling nauseous. Food would sit on my plate while I pushed it around, my mind racing through scenarios, consequences, outcomes. My best friend Emma finally confronted me during lunch one day, putting her hand over mine and saying, "Harper, you look like you haven't slept in weeks. What's going on?" I wanted to tell her everything, but the shame of it paralyzed me. How do you admit that your own sister committed a federal crime using your identity? How do you explain that you're even debating what to do about it? I mumbled something about work stress and watched her face fill with concern that I didn't deserve, because I was lying to her too. Madison had turned me into a liar, and I hadn't even noticed it happening. Work became unbearable in a different way than before. My supervisor, Rita Chen, called me into her office after I'd missed 2 deadlines in the same week, something I'd never done in 7 years at the agency. She closed the door and looked at me with genuine worry. "Harper, you're one of our best analysts. Your attention to detail is usually impeccable, but lately you've been distracted. The Martinez case report had errors I've never seen from you before. Is everything okay at home?" I sat there wanting to scream that no, everything was not okay, that I was being destroyed by a moral crisis that could cost me this job I loved. But instead, I apologized and promised to do better. Rita wasn't satisfied. She suggested I take some personal days, said everyone needs a break sometimes. I couldn't tell her that taking time off would just mean more time alone with my thoughts. More time for Madison to pressure me, more time to drown in indecision. The physical symptoms of stress became impossible to ignore. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. with my heart pounding, sweat soaking through my sheets, having dreamed about being arrested myself for covering up Madison's fraud. I developed tension headaches that lasted for days, the kind where light hurt and sounds felt like they were drilling into my skull. My hands would shake during meetings. I'd catch myself staring blankly at my computer screen for hours, accomplishing nothing, just cycling through the same circular thoughts. Should I report her? Can I really destroy my family? What kind of person would I be if I stayed silent? What kind of person would I be if I didn't? The questions never ended. They just looped back on themselves like some kind of mental torture device. The isolation was crushing because I couldn't talk to anyone about what I was going through. I couldn't tell my parents without revealing Madison's crime. I couldn't tell my friends without admitting I was considering covering up fraud. I couldn't discuss it with my colleagues because they'd be obligated to report it, and I'd lose my job immediately. I was trapped in this bubble of secrecy that Madison had created, carrying the weight of her choices while she went on posting cheerful updates on social media about her thriving business. She'd post photos of herself at networking events, talking about manifestation and positive energy and trusting the universe. Meanwhile, I was falling apart, and she didn't even seem to notice. Or maybe she did notice and just didn't care as long as I stayed quiet. That thought made everything worse. The decision had weight because both paths led to destruction, just different kinds. If I reported Madison, I'd blow up my family. My parents would be devastated. They'd probably blame me, say I could have handled it privately, ask why I had to involve the authorities. Family gatherings would become battlegrounds or they'd stop happening altogether. I'd be branded as the daughter who sent her sister to prison, the cold-hearted sister who chose the law over loyalty. Madison could face years in federal prison. Her life would be ruined. And I'd carry that guilt forever, wondering if there was another way, if I'd been too harsh, if I'd destroyed her over money when family should mean more than that. But if I stayed quiet, I'd lose myself. I'd become complicit in a federal crime. I'd violate every principle I'd built my career on. I'd live in constant fear of the fraud being discovered anyway. And I'd teach Madison that she could do anything to me without consequences, which meant she'd probably do something like this again, maybe worse next time. Both paths ended in pain, but one path also ended in truth. The question was whether I had the courage to choose it, and that answer was about to be forced on me in the most unexpected way. The cost of being honest in this situation became crystal clear one morning when I received an email from the bank's fraud investigation department. My stomach dropped as I read the subject line, "Account activity review required, Wilson business loan." They were asking me to verify employment information, business revenue records, and confirm recent payment activity. The loan was now 90 days past due, and automated systems were flagging it for review. I had maybe 2 weeks before a human investigator would start digging deeper. Madison had missed 3 payments in a row, which meant her promises about the business doing well were lies. The clock wasn't just ticking anymore, it was screaming. I called her immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. "Madison, the bank is investigating. You have 2 weeks before this becomes official. What are you going to do?" Her response? "Harper, just stall them. You know how to talk to these people. Buy me some time." If you're watching this and thinking about the price of honesty versus the price of silence, make sure you're subscribed and hit that like button, because what happens next will change everything. Have you ever been asked to lie to protect someone and realized that protecting them meant destroying yourself? Tell me in the comments. The cost of truth meant looking at my parents and watching their hearts break. I rehearsed the conversation 100 times in my head. "Mom? Dad? Madison took out a loan in my name without my permission. She committed identity theft and fraud." I imagined my mom's face crumbling, my dad's disappointment, the way they'd immediately jump to defend Madison. "There must be a misunderstanding," they'd say. "Madison wouldn't do that. Are you sure you didn't agree to help her and forgot?" They'd question my memory, my perception, my version of events. Because accepting that Madison had done this meant accepting that they'd raised someone capable of it. It meant confronting all the times they'd enabled her, excused her, funded her failures. Parents never want to believe their golden child is capable of darkness, and I knew they'd twist themselves into pretzels trying to find an explanation that didn't make Madison the villain. The cost of truth was knowing I'd become the problem in their eyes, not her. The cost extended to my professional life in ways that terrified me more than anything else. If this fraud came to light while I worked at the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, the optics would be catastrophic. Even if I could prove I was the victim, questions would arise. Why didn't I report it immediately? Why did I wait? Did I benefit from the loan in any way? The investigation wouldn't just focus on Madison, it would scrutinize me too. My security clearance would be suspended during the investigation. My colleagues would whisper. My cases would be reassigned. Years of building trust and credibility would evaporate overnight. I'd be the analyst who couldn't even protect her own identity, who let her sister commit fraud under her nose. Even if I was eventually cleared, the stain would remain. Some people would always wonder if I'd been involved. My career trajectory, everything I'd worked for, would be permanently altered. But the cost of silence was just as steep, maybe steeper. If I helped Madison cover this up and it eventually came out anyway, I wouldn't just lose my job. I'd face criminal charges myself, accessory after the fact, conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of justice. I'd be testifying in my own trial, explaining why I chose to protect my sister instead of reporting a crime I discovered. No jury would be sympathetic to someone who worked in financial crimes enforcement and chose to hide fraud. I'd lose my freedom, my reputation, everything. And even if it never came out, even if we somehow got away with it, I'd lose myself. I'd become someone who violated their principles for convenience. Someone who could be manipulated by family guilt. Someone who enabled criminal behavior. Every day I'd wake up knowing I was living a lie, looking over my shoulder, waiting for it all to collapse. That's not living. That's just a different kind of prison. The truth also had a cost that nobody talks about. The cost of being proven right about someone you love. If I reported Madison and she was prosecuted, convicted, sent to prison, I'd have evidence that my sister was capable of betraying me without remorse. I'd have proof that our bond, our shared childhood, our supposed loyalty meant nothing when weighed against her ambitions. Part of me didn't want that confirmation. Part of me wanted to stay in the uncertainty, where I could still believe that maybe she'd been desperate, maybe she'd made one terrible mistake, maybe she was still the sister who braided my hair when I was 8 and taught me to ride a bike and promised we'd always be best friends. The truth would kill that version of Madison forever. It would force me to see her as she really was, someone who'd use me, manipulate me, threaten me, and feel no genuine remorse. And once you see someone that clearly, you can't unsee it. The relationship dies, and you have to grieve not just who they are, but who you thought they were. I wasn't sure I was strong enough for that grief, but I was about to find out I didn't have a choice. The internal conflicts raging inside me felt like a war between two versions of myself, and I couldn't figure out which one was really me. There was Harper, the loyal sister, who'd been shaped by years of family teachings about loyalty and protection. That Harper said things like, "She's your only sibling. You'll regret this forever if you report her. Family forgives. Family finds another way. You're being rigid and cold by even considering involving the authorities." This version of me remembered every good moment with Madison, every laugh, every secret we'd shared, every time she'd been there when I needed her. Well, the few times she'd been there, loyal Sister Harper made excuses. Madison was desperate. She wasn't thinking clearly. She'd pay it back. This didn't define who she really was. But then there was Harper the professional, the one who'd built a career on integrity and justice. That Harper said, "This is fraud. Period. You investigate crimes like this every day. You know the harm it causes. You can't make exceptions just because the criminal is related to you." These two versions fought constantly, exhausting me mentally and emotionally. I'd be at work analyzing a case file, and loyal Sister Harper would whisper, "But look how harsh the sentence is for identity theft. Could you really do that to Madison?" Then professional Harper would counter, "Madison did this to herself. You're not sending her to prison. Her choices are." I'd be lying in bed trying to sleep, and loyal Sister Harper would replay memories. Madison defending me against bullies in middle school, Madison helping me pick out my prom dress, Madison being my maid of honor at the wedding that never happened after my engagement fell apart. But professional Harper would interrupt. "Remember how she made that whole wedding disaster about her? Remember how she complained about the bridesmaid dress cost while you were heartbroken?" Every memory became a battlefield, with both versions of me fighting to control the narrative. The conflict intensified because I'd built my entire identity around being ethical and principled. My job wasn't just a paycheck, it was who I was. I'd chosen financial crimes specifically because I believed in accountability, in consequences, in the idea that systems only work when people follow rules. I'd spent years telling myself I was one of the good guys, fighting fraud, protecting victims, upholding justice. But now I was being tested on whether those principles applied when the situation got personal, when the cost got real, when following through meant sacrificing everything comfortable and familiar. It's easy to have principles when they don't cost you anything. It's easy to believe in justice when you're not the one who has to deliver it to someone you love. I felt like a hypocrite either way. If I reported Madison, I was the heartless sister who chose rules over relationships. If I didn't report her, I was a fraud myself, someone whose principles evaporated the moment they became inconvenient. The anxiety of this internal conflict manifested in bizarre ways. I'd find myself having full conversations out loud with no one there, literally arguing with myself. "She's your sister," I'd say to my empty apartment. Then I'd respond, "She's also a criminal." I'd pace for hours, wearing tracks in my carpet, going back and forth between decisions sometimes 5 times in a single evening. I'd pick up my phone to call the FBI hotline, then put it down, pick it up again, dial half the number, then hang up. Start drafting an email to my supervisor explaining the situation, then delete it. Write out a text to Madison saying I'd help her, then erase it. I was paralyzed by the impossibility of making a choice that wouldn't destroy something precious. And the longer I waited, the worse both options became, because now I'd also have to explain the delay. What made the internal conflict unbearable was that I could see valid arguments on both sides. Yes, Madison committed a serious crime, but also yes, she's my sister, and I love her. Yes, I have a professional obligation to report fraud. But also, yes, I have a family obligation to protect my loved ones. Yes, she needs to face consequences. But also, yes, those consequences would devastate multiple people beyond just her. There was no clean resolution, no way to honor all my values simultaneously. I'd have to choose which part of myself to betray, which identity to sacrifice. Would I betray Harper the sister or Harper the professional? Would I lose my family or my integrity? The war inside me raged every moment of every day, and I was so tired of fighting myself. I just wanted clarity, certainty, peace. But instead, I was about to face a moment that would force me to pick a side once and for all, whether I was ready or not. The anxiety and insecurity consumed me in ways I'd never experienced before, and I started questioning everything about myself. Was I being selfish by even considering reporting Madison? Was I secretly enjoying the power this gave me over her? The chance to finally be the one in control after a lifetime of being in her shadow? Was this about justice? Or was it about revenge dressed up in righteous clothing? I'd lie awake torturing myself with these questions, wondering if my anger at Madison was clouding my judgment. Maybe I was being vindictive. Maybe I was using this situation to punish her for all the times she'd been the favorite, the star, the one everyone loved more. These thoughts made me feel disgusting, like even my desire to do the right thing was somehow corrupted by petty sibling rivalry. I started seeing a version of myself I didn't recognize, someone bitter and resentful, someone who might actually want to see her sister suffer. Was that who I'd become? If you've ever questioned your own motives when making a difficult decision, if you've ever wondered if you're the villain in your own story, hit subscribe and like this video because understanding your own heart is the hardest part of any moral crisis. Have you ever doubted whether you were doing something for the right reasons? Share your experience below. Society's expectations weighed on me like concrete blocks tied to my ankles, dragging me down. Every movie, every TV show, every story I'd ever heard about families painted the same picture. Families stick together no matter what. The people who turned in their relatives were portrayed as traitors, rats, the ones who violated sacred bonds. I thought about mob movies where informants were the ultimate villains. I thought about how snitch was one of the worst things you could call someone. Even though I knew intellectually that those were criminals protecting criminals, the cultural messaging had still shaped me. It made me feel like reporting Madison would make me fundamentally bad, someone who betrayed their blood. Friends would post things on social media about loyalty, about having people's backs, about ride-or-die relationships, and every post felt like an accusation. Real family doesn't abandon each other, one post said, with hundreds of likes. I stared at it for an hour, feeling like it was written specifically to condemn me. The insecurity spread to every area of my life because if I couldn't trust my own judgment about this, what could I trust? I second-guessed decisions at work, asking colleagues to double-check analysis I'd normally be confident about. I couldn't commit to plans with friends because I didn't trust myself to show up in the right emotional state. Emma invited me to her birthday dinner, and I canceled the day of because I'd been crying all morning and couldn't pull myself together. She texted me, "Harper, I'm worried about you. This isn't like you at all. Please talk to me." But I couldn't. I was drowning, and I couldn't let anyone throw me a life preserver because accepting help meant admitting what was happening, and I wasn't ready for that. The isolation fed the insecurity, which fed more isolation, a vicious cycle that left me feeling like I was disappearing. My self-doubt manifested in obsessive research, like if I just gathered enough information, the right answer would become obvious. I spent hours reading psychology articles about family dynamics and enabling behavior. I joined online forums for identity theft victims, reading their stories, seeing how they'd handled it. Most of them reported the crime immediately, even when it was family. They talked about the freedom that came with not carrying someone else's secrets, the relief of putting the responsibility back on the person who'd committed the crime. But they also talked about the loneliness, the family members who cut them off, the guilt that never fully went away. I read articles about ethics and moral philosophy, trying to find some framework that would tell me definitively what to do. Kant would say, report her because it's categorically wrong to lie and cover up crimes. Utilitarians would say, calculate the greatest good for the greatest number. Care ethics would say, consider the relationships and the context. Every philosophical framework gave me a different answer, which just meant I was still alone with the decision. The worst part of the anxiety was how it made me doubt my own perceptions. Madison had gotten in my head so thoroughly that I started wondering if maybe I was overreacting. Maybe identity theft between family members wasn't that serious. Maybe I was being dramatic. Maybe this was normal, and I was the weird one for making such a big deal about it. She'd say things like, "Harper, people borrow from family all the time. I just didn't ask first because I knew you'd say no. But it's not like I'm some stranger who stole from you. We share DNA." And part of me would think, is she right? Am I being too rigid? Then professional Harper would scream, "No, this is gaslighting. This is manipulation. She committed a federal crime." But the doubt lingered, poisoning my certainty, making me question everything. The anxiety had fractured me into pieces, and I didn't know how to put myself back together. But I was about to be forced into a decision that would either break me completely or forge me into someone stronger than I'd ever been. The moment that forced my decision came from the most unexpected place, a mandatory ethics training at work. Our entire department had to sit through a 3-hour seminar about conflicts of interest and reporting obligations. The trainer, a former federal prosecutor named David Brennan, walked us through case studies of people who'd failed to report crimes they'd discovered. One case stopped me cold. It was about a banking compliance officer who'd discovered his brother was involved in money laundering. The compliance officer waited 6 months before reporting it, thinking his brother would fix it himself, hoping it would just go away. When it finally came out, both brothers were prosecuted. The compliance officer lost everything: his career, his freedom, his family, because he'd chosen loyalty over duty. David Brennan looked directly at our group and said something that burned itself into my brain. The cover-up is always worse than the crime. Always. Because the cover-up means you chose to participate. You became complicit. You crossed the line from victim to criminal. I sat in that conference room feeling like everyone could see right through me, like they all knew what I was hiding. My hands were shaking. My vision got blurry. I had to excuse myself to the bathroom where I locked myself in a stall and tried to breathe through a panic attack. This was it. This was the moment. I couldn't keep pretending I had more time to decide. The bank investigation was closing in. Madison had shown no signs of actually fixing anything. And now I'd just sat through 3 hours of training that made it crystal clear. If I didn't report this and it came out later, I wouldn't just lose my job. I'd go to prison myself. The decision had been made for me by reality. I just had to find the courage to follow through. That night, I did something I should have done weeks ago. I called my college mentor, Professor Sandra Martinez, the woman who'd inspired me to go into financial crimes in the first place. I didn't tell her all the details, but I laid out the hypothetical. What would you do if someone you loved committed fraud and asked you to cover it up? She was quiet for a long moment, then said, "Harper, I'm going to tell you something that might be hard to hear. People who ask you to compromise your integrity don't love you. They love what you can do for them. Real love doesn't ask someone to violate their values. Real love doesn't put someone in impossible positions. If this person truly cared about you, they never would have done this in the first place." Her words hit me like a bucket of ice water. Madison didn't love me, or at least her love was so twisted and conditional that it didn't resemble anything healthy. She loved me when I was useful, when I played my role, when I absorbed her problems without complaint. But she'd never actually considered what this would cost me. The final push came from an unexpected source: my dad. He called that same night, which was unusual because he typically let Mom handle family communication. "Harper," he said, his voice tired, "your mother is beside herself about whatever's going on between you and Madison. She says you two aren't speaking, that there's some big fight. I need you to tell me what's happening because I can't watch your mother worry like this." Something in his voice, the exhaustion, the genuine concern, made me crack. I told him everything: the loan, the fraud, the pressure to stay quiet, the threats, all of it. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Finally, he said, "Harper, I'm going to say something I should have said years ago. Your mother and I failed you. We let Madison get away with too much because it was easier than holding her accountable. We let you sacrifice too much because you never complained. And now she's done something unforgivable, and you're the one dealing with the consequences. I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you this. If you report her, I'll stand by you, even if your mother doesn't, even if it tears this family apart. You didn't create this situation. Madison did. Those words from my dad broke something open inside me. For the first time in weeks, I felt clear. I felt certain. I felt ready. That night, I drafted an email to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. I laid out everything. The loan, how I'd discovered it, Madison's admission, her pressure campaign, the timeline. I attached every document I had, bank statements, emails, text messages. I wrote about my position at FinCEN and acknowledged that my delay in reporting was inexcusable but explainable given the family circumstances. I took full responsibility for not coming forward immediately. I hit send at 2:47 a.m., and the moment I did, something shifted in my chest. The weight didn't disappear, but it changed. It wasn't the crushing weight of carrying someone else's crime anymore. It was the heavy but clean weight of having done something hard and right. I cried for an hour straight, grieving the sister I thought I had, grieving the family dynamic that was about to explode, grieving my own innocence about what family loyalty really means. But underneath the grief was something else. Relief. I'd finally chosen myself. I'd finally drawn a line. Now I had to face what came next, and it was going to be brutal. The FBI contacted me within 48 hours, which I wasn't expecting. Special Agent Rebecca Foster called my personal cell phone on a Saturday morning, her voice professional, but not unkind. She explained that they'd opened an investigation, that they'd need to interview me formally, and that I should expect them to contact Madison soon. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. Ms. Wilson will also need to speak with your employer about your security clearance and your delay in reporting. Standard procedure for someone in your position. My worst fear was materializing. I'd done the right thing, but I was still going to pay a price for waiting. Agent Foster scheduled my formal interview for Monday morning, which gave me exactly one weekend to prepare for what I knew had to happen next. I had to confront Madison face-to-face before the FBI showed up at her door. Not because I owed her a warning, but because I needed closure. I needed to say everything I'd been holding back. I drove to Madison's apartment Sunday afternoon, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I'd rehearsed what I wanted to say 100 times, but when she opened the door with that fake bright smile, everything I'd planned evaporated. She started with her usual routine. "Harper, come in. I've been meaning to call you. The business just landed 2 huge contracts and I'll be able to start making payments next month. See? I told you it would work out." She was still lying, still manipulating, still acting like everything was fine. I stood in her doorway and said 5 words that changed everything. "I reported you to the FBI." The smile dropped off her face like a mask shattering. For maybe 3 seconds, she just stared at me in absolute shock, her brain trying to process what I'd said. Then the shock transformed into rage so pure and sudden it actually made me take a step back. Madison exploded in a way I'd never seen before, screaming at a volume that probably had her neighbors calling the police. "You did what? Harper, what did you do? Do you have any idea what you've just done to me? To this family? You selfish, vindictive, cold-hearted witch." She called me names I'd never heard her use, insults that hit like physical blows. She grabbed a vase off her coffee table and threw it against the wall, shattering it into pieces. "I'm going to prison because of you. My life is over because you couldn't just help me for once. After everything I've done for you, after all the times I've been there for you, this is how you repay me?" I stood there taking it, letting her rage wash over me, because underneath her anger I could see the panic, the fear, the realization that she'd actually have to face consequences for the first time in her life. And honestly, part of me felt nothing. The sister I'd loved didn't exist anymore, if she ever had. This person screaming at me was a stranger. When she finally ran out of steam, breathing hard, mascara running down her face, I said what I'd come to say. "Madison, you didn't just steal money from me. You stole my identity. You risked my career, my freedom, my future. You committed a federal crime and then spent weeks trying to manipulate me into covering it up. You threatened me. You used our family as weapons against me. You showed me exactly who you are, and who you are is someone who would destroy her own sister without hesitation if it served your purposes. My voice was steady, calm, completely devoid of the emotion I'd felt for weeks. You want to talk about everything you've done for me? Name one thing, one actual sacrifice you made for me. You can't, because our entire relationship has been me giving and you taking. I'm done. The FBI will contact you tomorrow. Get a lawyer. Don't call me. Don't text me. Don't show up at my apartment. We're finished. Madison's face went through another transformation, from rage to desperation. She dropped to her knees, literally begging, grabbing at my legs like a child having a tantrum. Harper, please, you can still fix this. Call them back. Tell them you made a mistake. Tell them you were confused. I'll get help. I'll go to therapy. I'll pay back every penny. Just please, please don't do this to me. Think about Mom and Dad. Think about what this will do to them. Harper, I'm your sister. Your only sister. Please. She was sobbing so hard she could barely get the words out, but I felt nothing but a distant kind of pity. This was who she'd always been. I'd just been too blind to see it. When charm didn't work, when manipulation didn't work, when threats didn't work, she resorted to pathetic begging. It was just another tool in her arsenal, another way to try to control me. I gently removed her hands from my legs, walked to her door, and looked back one last time. Goodbye, Madison. I hope you get the help you need, but you're going to have to face this on your own. That's what consequences mean. I walked out, got in my car, and drove away while she screamed after me from her doorway. It was the hardest and easiest thing I'd ever done. The confrontation was over, but the fallout was just beginning, and it would be worse than I could have possibly imagined. Madison's reaction after the confrontation was to launch a full-scale campaign to paint me as the villain to everyone we knew. Within hours, she'd posted on social media about being betrayed by the person I trusted most, and family turning on family. She didn't mention the fraud, of course, just made vague posts about loyalty and backstabbing that her friends ate up, flooding the comments with support. You deserve better. Real family sticks together. Some people are snakes. She tagged old photos of us from childhood, making it look like I'd randomly attacked her for no reason. My phone blew up with messages from distant relatives and mutual friends who had no idea what had actually happened. People demanding to know why I was doing this to Madison. People calling me judgmental and cruel. She'd gotten to them first, controlled the narrative, and positioned herself as the victim before I could even begin to explain. My mom's reaction was exactly what I'd feared but hoped wouldn't happen. She called me Monday night, after the FBI had interviewed Madison, and she was hysterical in a way I'd never heard before. Harper Lynn Wilson, how could you? How could you do this to your sister? To this family? The FBI came to our house. They asked your father and me questions about Madison's business. The neighbors saw the federal cars. We're humiliated. And for what? Because Madison made a mistake? Because she borrowed from you without asking? You couldn't handle this privately? You had to involve the government? I tried to explain that it wasn't borrowing. It was identity theft. That Madison had committed a federal crime. That I had no choice. But Mom wasn't listening. You always have a choice. You chose to be vindictive. You chose your job over your sister. I raised you better than this. Dad tried to keep his promise about standing by me, but the pressure from Mom broke him within days. He called with his voice full of defeat and said, "Harper, I meant what I said about supporting you, but your mother is talking about divorce over this. She says she can't be married to someone who won't defend his daughter. I'm caught in the middle here, and I don't know what to do." I could hear Mom yelling in the background, telling him to hang up, calling me names I won't repeat. Dad said he needed some space to figure things out, that he hoped I'd understand. Translation: he was choosing Mom and Madison over me, just like I knew he would when it came down to it. I lost both parents that day. They didn't formally disown me, but they might as well have. The silence that followed was deafening. The extended family reactions split into camps with clear sides. My Aunt Patricia, Mom's younger sister, called to tell me I was brave and that Madison had this coming. "I've watched that girl manipulate your parents for decades," she said. Someone needed to hold her accountable finally. But she also said she couldn't publicly support me because it would cause a rift with Mom, so her support was private and therefore useless. My cousin Jessica, who'd always idolized Madison, sent me a long text about how I'd destroyed the family, how Madison was suicidal now, how I'd have to live with that guilt forever. My Uncle Robert, Dad's brother, took Madison's side without even asking for my version of events, posting on Facebook about modern society's obsession with punishment over redemption. The family WhatsApp group that had been active for years went silent after I sent one message explaining what had actually happened. No one responded, no one asked questions. They just ghosted me collectively, choosing willful ignorance over uncomfortable truth. Madison herself alternated between attacking me and playing victim, depending on her audience. She gave an interview to a local news station about financial disputes between siblings that didn't mention the fraud, but made me sound like a monster who'd weaponized the legal system over a family disagreement. She started a GoFundMe for her legal defense fund that raised $15,000 in 2 weeks from people who had no idea they were funding a criminal defense. She posted videos crying about how she'd trusted the wrong person and how blood isn't always thicker than water. She never once, not in any message or post or interview, took responsibility for what she'd done. It was always about how she was being persecuted, how the system was unfair, how I was cruel. Watching her refuse to own her actions even when facing federal charges was the final confirmation I'd needed. This wasn't a good person who'd made one mistake. This was someone fundamentally unable to accept accountability, and I'd spent my whole life enabling that. The family fallout was brutal, isolating, and exactly as painful as I'd feared. But something unexpected was starting to happen too. Something that would show me I hadn't lost everything after all. Just the things that were destroying me. The consequences of my decision played out over the next 6 months in ways that were both worse and better than I'd imagined. Madison was indicted on 3 counts of identity theft, 1 count of bank fraud, and 2 counts of making false statements to a financial institution. Her bail was set at $50,000, which our parents paid by taking out a second mortgage on their house, further cementing their resentment toward me. The preliminary hearings were nightmares where I had to sit in a courtroom and watch my sister's defense attorney try to paint me as vindictive and possibly complicit. They actually argued that I must have known about the loan initially and only reported it after a falling out, which was so absurdly false it would have been funny if it wasn't destroying my reputation. My own security clearance review dragged on for 3 months, during which I was on administrative leave from work, watching my career hang by a thread because I'd waited too long to report the crime. Every day felt like punishment even though I'd done the right thing. But here's something nobody warns you about when you make a hard moral choice. You don't feel like a hero, you feel exhausted, you feel hollowed out. You question the decision 1,000 times even when you know it was right. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. wondering if I could have handled it differently, if there was some magical third option I'd missed, if the pain I'd caused was worth the principle I'd defended. I'd see Madison's mugshot from when she was processed, and my heart would break even though I was furious at her. That's the thing about consequences. They don't feel clean and satisfying like they do in movies. They feel messy and complicated and sad. I'd report her again if I had to, but I'd never say it felt good. It felt necessary, which is different. Some of the hardest decisions we make don't feel triumphant. They just feel like survival. The professional consequences were significant, but not career-ending, which I know makes me lucky. After my security clearance review concluded that I'd been a victim, and my delay was understandable given the family dynamics, I was reinstated at work with a formal reprimand in my file. My supervisor, Rita, pulled me aside and said, "Harper, you did the right thing, but you should have come to us immediately. The moment you discovered that fraud, your obligation was clear. I'm glad you eventually reported it, but the delay put you in this agency in a compromised position." She was right, and I owned that. The reprimand meant I couldn't apply for promotions for 2 years, which stung because I'd been on track for a senior analyst position. Some colleagues treated me with sympathy, others with suspicion, wondering if there was more to the story than I'd admitted. Water cooler conversations would stop when I walked by. I'd become that person, the one with the complicated family situation, the one who'd had FBI agents investigating her, The emotional consequences were the hardest to measure because they were ongoing, shifting, evolving. I lost my entire family unit in one decisive moment. Mom stopped speaking to me completely. Dad would occasionally send guilty texts like, "Hope you're doing okay," but never actual conversation, never support, never acknowledgement of what I'd been through. Madison's trial became this thing that hung over everything, scheduled and rescheduled, dragging out the pain. I had to testify against her, which meant sitting on a witness stand while her lawyer tried to make me look like a liar, while Madison stared at me with pure hatred, while our parents sat in the gallery supporting her and refusing to even look at me. I gave my testimony clearly and honestly, explaining how I'd discovered the fraud, how Madison had admitted it, how she'd pressured me to stay quiet. The jury looked at me with sympathy, but that didn't make it hurt less to be doing this to my own sister, even though she'd done it to herself. But something unexpected emerged from the wreckage, something that took months for me to recognize. I started to feel lighter, not happy, not vindicated, but lighter. The weight of carrying Madison's secrets was gone. The weight of being responsible for her choices was gone. The weight of playing a role I'd never chosen was gone. I started therapy, and my therapist asked me, "Who are you without the role of Madison's protector and your family's peacekeeper?" I realized I had no idea. I was 32 years old, and I'd never actually explored who Harper Wilson was when she wasn't busy managing everyone else's crises and emotions. The consequences had destroyed my family, yes, but they'd also freed me from a dynamic that was slowly killing my soul. Was that trade worth it? I asked myself that question every day. The answer varied depending on how lonely I felt that particular morning, but deep down, underneath all the grief and pain, I knew that I'd finally chosen myself, and that choice, however devastating, was also the beginning of something I'd never had before: actual freedom. And that freedom was about to teach me lessons I never could have learned while still trapped in the old patterns. The biggest lesson I learned from this entire nightmare was that financial abuse is real abuse, even when it comes from family, even when it's not accompanied by physical violence. For years, I'd minimized what Madison had done because we shared DNA, because we'd grown up in the same house, because she was my sister. But identity theft is intimate violation. She'd taken the most fundamental parts of who I was, my name, my social security number, my financial identity, and used them for her own benefit without my consent. That's not a mistake. That's not a gray area. That's abuse. And the fact that she'd felt entitled to do it, that she'd expected me to cover for her afterward, that she'd tried to manipulate me using family loyalty as a weapon, all of that was part of the abuse pattern. I'd spent my whole life being trained to accept smaller violations from Madison, which made this massive violation feel like just one more thing I should absorb silently. Learning to call it what it was, abuse, was revolutionary for me. Financial crimes aren't victimless, which seems obvious when you work in financial crimes, but it hits different when you're the victim. That $100,000 loan destroyed my credit score for years. Even after the fraud was proven and the debt was removed from my record, the damage took time to undo. I couldn't refinance my mortgage for better rates. I got rejected for a credit card I'd had for a decade because the initial fraud flags had triggered security measures. I had to write letters to credit bureaus, provide court documents, prove over and over that I was the victim, not the perpetrator. Every financial application asked if I'd ever been involved in fraud investigations, and technically I had been, which required explanation letters that made me relive the trauma repeatedly. The practical consequences of identity theft extend far beyond the initial crime, creating ripples that affect everything from housing to employment to basic financial transactions. Madison had thrown a bomb into my financial life and then acted surprised when the explosion caused damage. The lesson about integrity was painful, but necessary. Integrity means nothing if you only have it when it's convenient. I'd always thought of myself as ethical, principled, someone who did the right thing, but I'd never been tested in a way that cost me everything. It's easy to report fraud when the perpetrator is a stranger. It's easy to uphold justice when you have nothing to lose. The real test of integrity comes when doing the right thing means sacrificing relationships, comfort, belonging, family. I learned that my principles only meant something if I was willing to defend them even when it hurt, even when it was lonely, even when everyone around me said I was wrong. Integrity isn't a feeling, it's a practice. It's choosing your values over your comfort, over and over, even when the price feels unbearable. Some people never face that test, and I envy them. But having faced it, I know something about myself now that I didn't before. I'm stronger than I thought, and my principles aren't negotiable. I also learned that setting boundaries with family isn't betrayal, it's self-preservation. The narrative Madison and my parents pushed was that I'd destroyed the family by reporting the crime. But actually, Madison destroyed the family by committing the crime in the first place. My boundary, I will not cover up fraud even for family, wasn't cruel, it was healthy. For years I'd had no boundaries with Madison, which meant she'd learned she could take anything from me without consequences. My money, my time, my emotional energy, my identity. The fraud was just the logical endpoint of a lifetime of boundary violations that I'd allowed. Learning to say no to family, to say this is where I draw the line, felt impossible because I'd been taught that family doesn't have boundaries. Family accepts everything. But that's not love. That's dysfunction. Real love respects boundaries. Real love doesn't ask you to compromise yourself. The family I lost wasn't actually serving me. It was using me, and recognizing that difference changed everything. The final lesson, the one that took the longest to learn, was that doing the right thing doesn't always feel rewarding in the moment, but it compounds over time in ways you can't predict. 6 months after Madison's conviction, she got 18 months in federal prison plus restitution and probation. I ran into my old friend Emma at a coffee shop. I'd been avoiding her because I was ashamed of the whole situation, but she grabbed me in a huge hug and said, "Harper, I heard what happened. I'm so sorry you went through that. But I need you to know, watching you handle that with integrity even when it cost you everything, that changed me. I've been letting my brother manipulate me for years, and seeing your courage helped me finally set boundaries with him." She introduced me to her therapy group where several women were dealing with financial abuse from family members, and they'd heard my story and wanted to meet me. I became accidentally a voice for people navigating these impossible situations. My testimony from Madison's trial got cited in other identity theft cases involving family members. The consequence I'd feared, becoming known for this, actually turned into purpose. The pain I'd gone through wasn't wasted. It meant something, and that meaning, slowly, began to outweigh the loss. Not replacing it, but balancing it, making it bearable, showing me that integrity, while costly, also builds something solid underneath you that no one can take away. And that realization brought me to the hardest but most important truth I'd learned through this entire ordeal. Looking back at everything that happened, the hardest truth I had to accept was this: sometimes doing the right thing means losing people you love, and that's okay. Not easy, not painless, but okay. I spent so many years believing that keeping my family together was the most important thing, that loyalty meant absorbing anything thrown at me, that being a good sister meant sacrificing myself repeatedly. But Madison's fraud forced me to confront a question I'd been avoiding my whole life. What kind of person do I want to be when no one's watching? When it costs me everything? When there's no reward except knowing I didn't compromise myself? The answer came down to integrity. I wanted to be someone who could look herself in the mirror, someone whose principles weren't for sale, someone who understood that real love doesn't ask you to betray yourself. Choosing that version of me meant accepting that some relationships can't survive honesty, and maybe those relationships weren't as real as I'd thought. The transformation I went through wasn't dramatic or Hollywood-worthy. It was slow, painful, unglamorous. I didn't wake up one day feeling empowered and free. I woke up most days feeling lonely and questioning myself. But gradually, over months and then years, something shifted. I started building a life that was actually mine, not a role I'd been assigned. I made friends who valued me for who I was, not what I could do for them. I pursued hobbies I'd always been too busy to explore because I was managing Madison's crises. I got promoted at work eventually, once the reprimand period ended, because I was good at my job, and my integrity was now proven beyond doubt. I started dating someone who, when I told him this whole story on our third date expecting him to run, said, "That must have taken incredible courage. I respect the hell out of that. I built a chosen family of people who understood that boundaries are healthy, that accountability matters, that love doesn't mean enabling destruction." The relationship with my parents thawed slightly after Madison was released from prison. Not back to normal, never back to normal, but to a cautious distance where we could have awkward holiday dinners a few times a year. Mom never apologized for choosing Madison over me, but she stopped openly blaming me, which felt like the closest thing to progress we'd ever achieve. Dad started calling more regularly, carefully avoiding any topic of substance, but at least trying to maintain some connection. Madison and I haven't spoken since the trial. I heard through family gossip that she moved to another state, started using our mom's maiden name instead of Wilson, and tells people she's an only child. That hurt at first, but then I realized it was freedom. She'd removed herself from my life, saving me from having to enforce that boundary forever. Sometimes the trash takes itself out, as my therapist likes to say. What I want you to understand, if you're in a situation anything like mine, is that choosing yourself isn't selfish. Protecting your integrity isn't cruel. Setting boundaries with family isn't betrayal. These are lies that manipulative people tell to keep you trapped in dynamics that serve them. The truth is messier and harder. Some family members will never be who you need them to be, and continuing to sacrifice yourself won't change them. It'll just destroy you. Walking away from toxicity, even when it's wrapped in family ties and childhood memories, is an act of self-love. It's also an act of faith in yourself, faith that you're worth protecting, faith that you can build something better than what you're leaving behind. That faith was terrifying to exercise because I'd never valued myself enough to believe I deserved protection, especially from family, but I did deserve it. And so do you. The most profound shift happened in how I define family now. It's not about blood or obligation or guilt. It's about mutual respect, reciprocal support, genuine care. It's about people who show up for you without needing a crisis to motivate them, who celebrate your wins without jealousy, who respect your boundaries without punishment. Some of those people happen to share my DNA. Most of them don't. And that's okay. I have friends who feel more like siblings than Madison ever did. I have mentors who've shown me more parental love than I received growing up. I have a community of people who see me, really see me, and choose me every day. That's family. The rest is just genetics and shared history, which matters less than I'd been taught to believe. This whole nightmare taught me that the family you choose matters more than the family you're born into. And choosing wisely, choosing people who honor your worth, that's where real belonging lives. And that truth set me free in ways I'm still discovering. So here's what I need to ask you, because this story isn't just about me, it's about anyone who's ever faced an impossible choice between loyalty and integrity. What would you have done in my place? Would you have reported your sister, knowing it would destroy your family? Would you have stayed silent, protecting someone who'd violated you so deeply? I genuinely want to know, so leave a comment below telling me your take on this whole situation. And if you've made it this far in my story, if you've stuck with me through all the pain and complexity and uncomfortable truths, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because you're the kind of person who isn't afraid of real stories, messy stories, stories that don't have clean Hollywood endings. That means everything to me, and I want you here for whatever comes next. The question I keep coming back to, the one that haunts me in the best and worst ways, is this. Do you believe revenge ever truly brings peace, or does it just feed more anger? Because reporting Madison wasn't revenge, even though that's how my family saw it. It was accountability. It was boundaries. It was choosing not to be destroyed by someone else's choices. But the line between justice and revenge can feel razor thin when emotions are running high, and I think about that a lot. I think about whether there's a version of this story where everyone heals, where Madison learns and grows, where my parents understand what they enabled for decades. Maybe that version exists in some alternate timeline. In this timeline, in reality, healing looks like accepting that some bridges burn, and that's okay because they were leading nowhere good anyway. After hearing my entire story, after walking through every painful decision and consequence with me, I want you to reflect on your own life. Are there relationships where you're sacrificing your integrity to keep the peace? Are there people who take from you without giving back, who violate your boundaries without consequence, who expect you to absorb their problems while offering nothing in return? Those patterns don't fix themselves. They escalate. They grow. They metastasize until one day you're facing your own version of my crisis, wondering how you got there, realizing you've been teaching people how to treat you for years. The lesson I learned the hardest way possible is that you have to draw lines before you're forced to draw them in crisis, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no. My final thought, the one I want to leave you with as we close out this chapter of my life, is about the cost of silence versus the cost of truth. Staying silent would have cost me my soul, my career, my self-respect, and eventually my freedom when the fraud was inevitably discovered. Speaking truth cost me my family, my comfort, my sense of belonging, and years of grief and recovery. Both paths had unbearable costs. But here's the difference. The cost of truth, while devastating, also brought growth, authenticity, freedom, and self-respect. The cost of silence would have brought only decay, shame, fear, and an ever-increasing debt to dishonesty. Some prices are worth paying, not because they feel good, but because the alternative is worse. I paid the price for truth, and I'm still paying it in smaller ways every day. But I can sleep at night. I can look myself in the mirror. I can tell this story without shame. That's worth more than I knew when I was making the decision. If you want more stories like this, stories about hard choices and harder consequences, stories about family dysfunction and finding yourself in the wreckage, stories about integrity that costs everything and why it's still worth it, make sure you're subscribed and have those notifications turned on. Drop a comment telling me what resonated with you, what you disagreed with, what your experience has been with family loyalty versus personal boundaries. Your stories matter just as much as mine, and this community we're building here is about honesty, not perfection. Thank you for listening to my story, for not judging me for the hard choices I made, for understanding that sometimes love means letting go. I'll see you in the next video.